Well, so today I'd like to welcome uh, Dr. Dean Weinkauf. He's the Dean of University of St. Thomas. I've known Don for time. We'll talk about that in a second. But first of all, I'll give a little bit of a profile. Don he was a professor of chemical engineering in Sapporo. Prior to that, though, he also worked for the Shell Oil Company as a research engineer. He holds a PhD from the University of Texas. But he's been the dean at St. Thomas now 2008. My calculation, that's what, 13 years. So relative newbie on the block, a young dean, I suppose. Don. No, joking aside, you've got so much experience there, Don. But I can also say, having known you for some time, that Don's a fun guy. He's got a show with his students. I witnessed that when I went to visit him a few years ago. A lot of fun to be around. And I met the famous chess club at the engineering dean's meetings when we went to diverse conferences around the world. So Don, thanks very much to join me. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Paul, and thanks for having me on today. I really appreciate it.
It is. It would be nice if we were not having to drink coffee. It would be
Yeah. These are not
a
our
little bit
usual
more
beverages.
relaxed environment, right? But it's I really do appreciate you taking the time to meet with us today. But before we get to the really tough questions about what you do, what set you on this path of engineering in the first place? What was the trigger for you? And because I hear that students don't really fully appreciate what engineering is when they start their undergraduate process. That'd be interesting.
Yeah, I this question is not it's not a softball question. I think it's really a core question to our work as engineering educators. I mean, we have to ask ourselves what were those moments early in our careers where we found engineering. And in my case, I'm from a very small town in the state of Wisconsin, where I didn't see an engineer, a town of 1,000 people. I didn't know what engineers did. But I had some mentors, high school teachers that led me in this direction, that pointed me that maybe engineering would be something that would be good for me. In fact, I remember telling my chemistry professor, I want to be a chemist, or chemistry teacher in high school. I want to be a chemist. And he said, well, let's rethink this. And because I think he saw something else in me. And in fact, my PhD dissertation is dedicated to that moment. That chemistry teacher just said, what else can you be doing? And from there, I found engineering, and again, I didn't know what it was, but it's been a joy ever since. And really, the surprise is that I think we view engineering as somewhat of a technical driven education, and it is, but it's far more about taking teams of people towards technical solutions. And that's what I found in my work at Shell. It's what I found in my work in academia, is that regardless of what we think about engineering in terms of technical skills driven, really a talent of moving talent.
And then you started Shell, or was that just one of the jobs that you had before you went into?
Well, yeah, no, I got my PhD at Texas Austin, and then went on to work for Shell Oil Company. Again, a team of folks all around the world, having to navigate everyone's different impressions of where the technology needed to go. We were working on the development of introduction of a new plastic material for Shell Oil Company that, again, it was just such an exciting place to be. I really got my really my deep engineering experience there, just learning about what it takes to bring a technology to fruition. And I'll go back, it's about people. I tell this to students all the time. There are 1,000 or 100 solutions to every problem. What's going to make your solution the one that thrives? And I'll tell you right now, it's not going to be because you're going to calculate your way to the top. You're going to drive solutions that are responsive and receptive to all of the members of your team. And so it is people. It's about people.
Yeah, people ask me what are the success factors when you're running a company. I say it's three things: it's people, people, and people. I use that line all the time, and I have to say when I talk to people about when I'm interviewing now, a lot of it's around your character, how do you interact with other people, how do you, can you read a room? Those kinds of things are really important. And I guess that leads me into a good segue, because I think the thing that's on top of everyone's mind right now is, and I'm a big believer in project work. And what are the kind of challenges that you faced in keeping that going in during the pandemic for the last 12 or so months?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, of anything that we've learned in the pandemic is how important it is to sustain culture in the years in advance of this incredible disruption. If we had not focused on our teamwork and our culture that we thrived on, and reliance on one another and our own resiliency based on our culture, and based on the core questions that we ask when we're faced with difficult questions, um, or difficult, divergence in our path. As long as we keep those core questions of why we're doing this, and we answer those questions, then the solutions and the next steps become a lot easier. And I think of anything, what we've learned with the pandemic is our resiliency and our reliance on our core culture, and that needs to be fostered and fomented, years in advance of any disruption. So, as soon as you lose sight of that, you are setting yourself up for really failure during disruptions.
Like I said, I've been to your campus and I've seen you interact with your faculty, but amazing was the interaction that you had with your students. So you are connected with your students, so you lead by example. And I think,
Yeah, well, I think that is the key. In fact, as deans, that's probably the biggest um, concern we have, is taking that very major step away, and then how do you sustain that? Because that's what we thrive on, development of our students. And so you have to work hard to make time and space for those relationships to exist. And it's difficult as dean, but if we can get more deans with that same sort of perception, then that culture spreads. Yeah, no, I can't exist without students, and that's why you get into this business, because of students and their development. So, and I think if we have young deans out there, I would suggest that they make that a priority in their sustainability as a great dean.
so, in that vein, so when you started, like I said, you do a lot of project-based work.
Mhm.
How have you maintained the team spirit, in this artificial environment, this online world?
Well, our classroom experience and our lab experience has been entirely disrupted, and that has been the real test. That's been the real challenge that we've had in this time. Is that you know did that, as I've talked about, we rely heavily on that relationship with students and connections. If I think we talked a little bit about this, about if in our pre-pandemic times, if we had 30 students in our class, you would have 3 or 4 students that you needed to pay close attention to offer those extra office hours, knowing that they might have been working 2 jobs, or knowing that they're maybe a little bit fragile in terms of their safety nets, in terms of their success in engineering. And I will say that this has been the most difficult part of the pandemic, is that those 3 or 4 students now in that class of 30, where you needed to expend a large amount of energy on whether it's projects or getting together with other students or making sure that they've made your office hours, that those 3 or 4 students now have expanded to 20 to 25. And so it's been an exhausting process of prioritizing the development and connections with our students, in this period of time where the numbers of I'm not saying special cases anymore, the number of cases of different multimodal, connections with these students has just expanded tremendously. And I think of the one thing that we're missing or losing here in this time is just really the exhaustion of our faculty, who are prioritizing those connections, and just needing to expend so much energy to sustain them for the different stories that are happening in our students' lives. And let's not forget the different stories that are happening in our own faculty's lives. And so, yeah, the project-based stuff. I mean, just to get back to, I mean, we were mailing out laboratory kits to our students, breadboards and things like that, so that the students could be working in the laboratory, remotely with the equipment, maybe not the high-end oscilloscopes and things like that to do the analysis, but certainly the creativity that our faculty had just to break through those barriers that they insist upon on breaching to connect with our students.
So I think as we move through this, you put a lot of things in place, and like understanding the journey of your faculty, but all of the students out there, that's an eye-opening experience as well. And in some cases, you found out probably more than you wanted to learn. But moving beyond that, I think the human side, you and your faculty is probably going to be stronger. What other things do you think you're going to take away from the pandemic that are positive in terms of education moving forward?
So I mean, are you talking about taking away or positives? I mean, I think there are some real positives on the other side of this too. The that complete disruption that's happened has forced a lot of learning, as you said. I think we've been fortunate to have entered this pandemic in terms of in a time of great reliability. If this pandemic would have struck 5 years ago, my guess is that it would have been complete chaos. So the reliability of technology has really been amplified. And I also think that we've learned to communicate very differently as well. The number of quick check-in short sessions that I have with both faculty leaders, our board members, our alumni, we can check in for a 20-minute meeting just to give you an update on all this stuff. So we do have some positives on the other side of this that we can't ignore. Something else that I think you're going to see emerging, Paul, too, is that you're going to start to see aggregations of smaller universities combining their expertise. So let's just say St. Thomas has 2 outstanding world-renowned experts in thermal fluids or in artificial intelligence. Well, what if we got together with 2 or 3 other universities to offer a master's program, which is a collection of the best talent? And again, I think that collaborative spirit, that expectation that education can be delivered along these lines, especially in these niche areas where many of the smaller universities might not have the let's just say the aggregation of the numbers of team members that it takes to do that. I think you're going to start to see a proliferation of that, not only from the badging kind of stuff, but actually full-blown degrees that could be navigated amongst a consortium of smaller universities that have particular expertise to collect their ideas. So whether you're technical sales and offering demonstrations or advancing, I would say, areas of master's programs and advanced education, those things are going to be the positives on the other side of this.
Well, that's a conversation I was the other day. The notion that what you could have a degree in one program where in a certain area, but why can't you take that course from somebody who's a university, just up the road somewhere? Now that leads me into the question, because obviously most of the United States had a profound impact on the finances of universities, right? So maybe with that idea and other, how have you managed the financial side of the equation, and what are the challenges that you think might linger on?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that really I think have been impacting our work, and number one, I think, is uncertainty. If you look at last spring of 2020, what you saw is just basically a recoiling of ideas, just caused by the idea of just so much level of uncertainty. As our trustees at the University of St. Thomas, we're asking us to do scenario planning from 30% loss in revenue to 10% loss in revenue. And we started with a 10% loss in revenue, and to be quite honest, that was a pretty good guess. And so we immediately initiated scenario 1 planning with the hope that we wouldn't have to do scenario 2, 3, and 4. But really what that did was it really just acknowledged that the level of uncertainty last spring when budgets start to get set was so, it was such a, up in the air that I think you saw a recoiling of sort of innovation and ideas about how classrooms could change, other than revamping all of the classrooms to be have an online presence. So there was that uncertainty. The other thing I think that a lot of deans and higher ed learn is our reliance on the whole spread of the university. We forgot that our dormitories have a certain number of fixed costs, and whether they're operating at 100% or 80% or 60%, those fixed costs remain and they impact the whole university. So I think our interreliance, that the idea of one university really was brought up here. And so no one's going to be thinking about my college anymore, or shouldn't be, because the impacts on these major disruptions are going to be broad spread. But I think right now, looking forward, I think the lights at the end of the tunnel, the edge of the forest is clear. That clarity is really, and certainty is starting to resolve itself. And so our budgeting process is not very much different from what we would have had in the year prior to the pandemic.
So because what you're saying is quite interesting. Now your natural instinct is more likely to consider the whole as opposed to brains that exist within the university being parochial. And do you get a sense of sharing amongst the schools? Is it going to get better, do you think, or are we going to go back to the old stuff?
Well, those let's just say tensions and vying for attention in a university, especially when there's funding and faculty lines being distributed, that, I mean, we always want to be tooting our horn and talking about what we're doing. But as I said, I think the realization that this pandemic brought is that things like this level of disruption can really impact the whole university, regardless of who's growing, who isn't. So yes, I do think this pandemic has brought on that level of interdependence. And as I mentioned earlier, with the program where we have expertise in different universities, for example, at St. Thomas, we have shared with the School of Business or College of Business, we have a business analytics and a data science program inside of our School of Engineering. Those two programs have 3 or 4 overlapping courses, which are taught from faculty expertise in both colleges. And so that's the kind of thing that maybe before didn't exist, but will now be amplified by this new reliance on interdependence, because we can't build that expertise and sustain it in these smaller and smaller units.
And so the interdependent resources between maybe different schools within the university, sharing resources with different universities who may have expertise in another area. Have you experimented with remote labs, like using labs from other places, or them using labs that you've had?
Yeah, I would say that the initial response was to make sure that our traditional classrooms, became connected. And then I would say that you're going to start to see maybe a change in that mindset towards the laboratories, because the same issues are going to exist. And I think that they exist in many facets. And maybe I would say an emerging facet of that is trying to reach students earlier. But it also, the nature of these laboratories is improving to such an extent that the virtual components, the holographic components, the immersion that some of these things are emerging with. I think we're going to see that's going to be the next step here. Is okay, we saw the classroom innovation and renovation. That was pretty straightforward. Cameras, microphones, speakers, recording capability and modalities. And now we're going to see that moving towards the laboratories. And maybe not out of a sense of replacing the hands-on experience on campuses, but I would view it more as an outreach component, especially for the early laboratory sessions. and then addressing again that diversity where we might have collaborations with universities outside of our own region.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's an area that's near and dear to my heart. The idea of having virtual labs that students can use 24/7, and then they can actually do some of the fundamental understanding, get some technical understanding, go into the lab and communicate their ideas or their concerns, and have a deeper understanding, a deeper discussion with the faculty. That's really important.
And you raise a really good point. What about being able to repeat the experiment? What we see with our students in our recorded lectures and remote lectures is not necessarily that they like the freedom of watching it once. They love the freedom of doing it twice without impacting the time of the professor. So, what you said is, maybe true, but what about testing different variables? I didn't have the time in the 2-hour lab session to try this. And now that I'm writing up the report, what if I did try this? I think those virtual lab components, might allow for that experimentation, maybe even outside of the traditional classroom time.
Well, to be honest, what we're finding is that students are spending more time on them because they do repeat and try again. And then thing which I'd love to get your perspective on this, because you've been educated for a long time. That notion of learning from your peers, that eureka moment.
I think that eureka moment, or and I mentioned the word breaking things. I taught computer programming for engineers for a number of years at my former institution. And what I was so stunned by was that the students with software were afraid of making a mistake. What if I hit this button and the program just goes into a continuous loop? It's like, well,
Right.
and that. And it's kind of like the Tootsie Roll pop, with the owl. How many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop? And the turtle doesn't know, and what the other animal doesn't know. And finally, the owl just says, "Well, let me see. 1, 2, 3." It's that is what we need to get. And to be very honest, some of this equipment is not only from a safety standpoint, but cost. Maybe we don't want students to be making those. So let's just say mistakes. We love people breaking things here at St. Thomas because that makes they have to get on the phone and learn how to fix it. But in these virtual labs, not only after hours, but also there might be just a less of a tendency to fear that they're going to do something wrong. And who knows? What if the system goes out of control?
Yeah, just
Then
reboot.
we just watch it spin out of control on the screen and not in real life.
Well, I mean, it's absolutely true. I mean, because for example, in our world, robots, they're expensive, and second, if they get out of control, they can cause a lot of damage, right? So if you can practice your trade things in a safer environment. We talked a little bit about the democratization or the accessibility. Is that something that you think is going to be improved by what's happened down the road?
Yeah, I do. And again, getting even back to the virtual lab components, what we face here in Minnesota is that we have a population of about almost 6 million people, but nearly 4 million of that is in a very concentrated section of the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. And so how do we reach those outstate groups? How do we reach the Native American tribes where they're at? So I do think all of this, whether it's virtual laboratories and how do we reach to your students, to your college students who have jobs and are constrained by that with families and jobs, and then working on their 2-year associate's degrees. If any of those things can be broken down, this is where we're going to be needing to see that. Now, getting back to your point about democratization of technology, this has been, I love this conversation, because this is where engineering educators really need to be, let me say, concerned. And the reason why it's a concern is that you have to remember, for every 8th grader who is now experimenting with CAD, that first-year experience in CAD is now diminished in value because these are going to be old things. I mean, I remember 15 years ago starting into this deanship where we were still having our freshmen work on Lego robotics. And I looked to the 8th grade junior highs around here, and these guys are doing Lego robotics. The whole game is upping, whether it's 3D printing or CAD drawing. And this has been true. I mean, 25 years ago, when I worked for Shell Oil Company, we had this very sophisticated fluid mechanics software where only really mature PhD level mathematicians, fluid dynamicists could really drive this software. Well, this is the same software now that we're introducing to sophomores and juniors in our fluid mechanics course.
Right.
So all of that stuff is being, that accessibility, that democratization of technology is really forcing engineering to up its game. We've got to be, moving past some of these, let's just say, routine things and redesigning our curriculum that really ups the game for engineers to be really exploring the frontiers of these technologies versus being really sort of practicing what is accessible to high school students.
So how do you find that? Because I know I've had this conversation because there's this within faculty in some cases, and then on the other extreme, you've got people that want to break everything and throw it all away and start from scratch. There are so many tools that we can use today, but therein lies a real problem, I think, is what do you take out? There's put in. Do you have those debates? I mean, what's the kind of feedback you get?
It's the 5-pound bag and 10 pounds of stuff problem, right? We talk about this all of the time, because we have things like, oh, are you teaching leadership, and are you teaching character and ethics and all of these components, which of course they're said in ABET, but are they really developed in our students? And if we ask more, what are we going to take out? Mathematics. We've talked about this. Laplace transforms. All of those things were derived to make differential equations and manipulations of differential equations easier. Now our computational capability is so advanced. So, do I have the answer? No. I'm one person that loves to have these conversations, and our faculty are embracing those. But we have to recognize how critical it is. Because as I said, if we start every one of our freshmen at the level that we began with 20 years ago and walk them through the derivations and the technology and all that stuff, that time we've spent with them is time that we've missed not taking to the next level, because all of those, let's just say, non-technically oriented people have access to those same tools. And we really need to be careful as engineering educators that we're good stewards of our time with our students so that we can take them to the next level.
Yeah, and I think it's having some really talented engineers, a number of them, different fundamental skills. They have in controls and robotics and that kind of area. But the one thing they all know is that none of them can design a whole product by themselves. They have to be able to work with other people. They have to accept that they have to pass something off and take it back. And that community and that is really important. And I think that's where some of the project work becomes critically important.
Yeah, and immersion in that experience. We have an incredible senior design clinic, and I think you saw the manifestation of those projects here at St. Thomas. Great relationships with industry, real authentic market-driven projects. And the demands on the students are real. I mean, they really feel. I wouldn't say the pressure of what it takes. And I'll tell you right now, over the last 13 years and hundreds of these projects with industry, if you asked any one of our faculty members, what was the number one reason for, let's just say, not failure of that project and not succeeding where it could have or not met its goals? And the number one reason is that the team didn't get there together. There's no question about that. I mean, in fact, the technology is very rarely the reason why these projects fail. Very rarely. That the students have that capability of really advancing the technical components of these projects to a level that our industry sponsors are really surprised by, that students have this capability. But I will say the number one reason for failure or missing goals is that the fact that the team can't get there together.
Having been to your campus, anyone that's listening, you should contact Don and make your way there, because when you have the joy with which they are doing their projects with, I mean, that captures value of
Yeah. Yeah, they really take it on. You know, it's funny how the project starts as we're doing this for the customer, and all of a sudden you see this ownership develop, and it has to. You know, and you know this from your own work in life and after college. Unless you take that ownership, that the projects are not gonna succeed the way they should or could. So yeah, I would say that ownership evolves, and then what you see at the end, manifestation and delivery of the working prototype to the customer, there's just a real pride. And I will say this, that I think one of the secrets is that we dangle failure. We let them dangle, and they have to work it out themselves. So
well, you know, and I'll just reiterate, you know, and go to your school is going to a university that has a tremendous character. It's amazing culture. A lot of it stems from yourself, Don. I've witnessed you with the students, how excited they are to see you in a bar after graduation. That's unusual. Oh, sorry. No, that wasn't you.
that's okay.
And I know you've got lots of friends, alumni, people who've graduated. I'm going to try and make it down there again sometime, you know, for sure. The home of Tyler Moore. I remember that was a statue that I saw, which was very
Yeah,
famous.
yeah, no,
But the last thing,
welcome anytime, Paul. You know, by the way, we're building a new building with a new controls lab and a new we're going to break ground next spring. So we're very excited.
You heard it here, folks. You heard it here, folks. We're going to come down there and help you fill up that lab with. Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Don. I really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you in person.
Yeah, Paul, I miss your company, and I'm looking forward to raising a glass sometime soon. Hopefully this fall sometime would be
hopefully it will be. Thanks very much indeed. All the best.
Cheers.